The explosion painted the night in molten daylight, a second sun blooming in the cul-de-sac. Searing through silence like the wrath of a forgotten bomb, shards of scorched metal rained across driveways, embedding themselves into manicured lawns, an HOA-approved topiary with surgical violence. A drone's twisted remains sizzled on the roof of my shed. No, my reactor, and through the smoke in flashing red and blue chaos. I stood in nothing but slippers and a robe, holding a chipped coffee mug and watching Karen sob into the debris of her suburban crusade. That's me, right there in the smoke. Maybe you're watching from a quiet apartment or a noisy dorm room, maybe from a cubicle with the sound off. Wherever you are, tell me, how far would you go for peace and power? You probably want to know how it got this far, how an HOA ended up firebombing a nuclear microreactor in a sleepy suburb. It's a long story, but it starts quietly. It always does. When I bought this land 15 years ago, it wasn't because I liked the view. The view was a barren ridge and some cow trails. It wasn't the tax breaks either. I had enough tax avoidance strategies written in corporate ink to last 3 lifetimes. And it sure as hell wasn't the community, because back then, there wasn't one. No cul-de-sacs, no recycled mailboxes, no cheerful lawn flags in spring, just 10 acres of thick pines, a stable water table, and a permitting office so understaffed they forgot to ask what I was building behind the gate, which is exactly how I wanted it. No neighbors, no questions, just trees, gravel, and time. Time to build something they said shouldn't exist. You see, I wasn't just a man with money and paranoia. I was a man with clearance. 2 decades in naval nuclear propulsion systems, 3 tours on classified vessels, a brief contractor stint with an agency that doesn't print business cards, and finally, 3 patents that most people would never see. The 4th was still classified, still is, technically, but the 3rd, that one was mine, and it was beautiful. A microreactor, self-regulating, compact, virtually undetectable, built for resiliency in off-grid, high-failure scenarios. No towers, no steam plumes, no exposed coils or spinning turbines, just a hum, a deep, low rhythm, like the heart of a mountain, and legal, buried in Subclause 4B of the DOE's 2011 Decentralized Infrastructure Resilience Mandate. You'd have to know the footnote was there, and then you'd have to speak fluent bureaucracy to decode it. Fortunately, I wrote part of it. The vault went in first 10 feet deep, 3 feet thick on all sides, leaded concrete with cross-bracing like the bones of some ancient beast, then the coolant chamber, twin intake wells, and the dispersal stack disguised. Of course, as a weather monitoring mast, it was poetic. Really, I didn't build a fortress. I built camouflage, above ground. It looked like a shed, steel-framed, industrial green, with a fake tool rack bolted to the side. The keypad. The keypad was hidden behind a propane grill cover. The reactor line ran 200 feet upslope to my house, triple insulated and shielded, impervious to storms, squirrels, and suspicion. But here's the part they never saw coming, the feed loop. I wasn't just powering my house. That would have been selfish. No, I was feeding clean, stable power back into the municipal grid under a private producer contract routed through a shell entity registered in Delaware. No name, just Node 17R. For over a decade, I was lighting up this community long before it had a name. I powered the water pumps, the Wi-Fi towers, the new developments half a mile west, the HOA pool's underwater LEDs, all of it. They called it Sunny Valley. But I was the damn sun, and it was fine. For 10 years, it was fine. No one visited, no one trespassed. The only mail I got was from county land use or junk catalogs trying to sell me tools I already owned. I drank coffee. I read novels. I watched the deer wander through the clearing, unbothered and unaware that beneath their hooves slept enough energy to light a hospital or black out a suburb. Then came the houses. They started small, like tumors, 1, then 3, then whole rows of them sprouting across the road, Faux Mediterranean boxes stacked in plasticky perfection, each one an identical shrine to overmortgaged dreams. Fiber optic lines were trenched, driveways were paved, and with them came the people, not evil people, just the kind who confuse quiet with control, the kind who think order equals peace, and that any deviation from aesthetic harmony is a threat to their HOA heaven. I remember the first packet, thick, glossy, smug. Welcome to the Sunny Valley Covenant. A list of rules, fence height limits, approved paint colors, lawn maintenance schedules, barbecue restrictions, noise ordinances after 8 p.m. All neatly printed in Helvetica, pretending to be reasonable. I didn't laugh. I simply opened my drawer and pulled out the notarized exemptions signed by the original developer. My land wasn't part of Sunny Valley. It never had been. I was a sovereign island in a sea of manicured paranoia. Karen didn't like that. Her full name was Karen Whitfield. But to me, she was simply the intrusion, president of the HOA. Graduate of some mid-tier liberal arts school with a minor in microaggressions and a major in power trips. She treated my exemption like a glitch in the matrix, something that had to be corrected. The first letter cited my non-standard fencing. The second, my unapproved utility shed. She didn't know what was inside, but she knew it didn't belong. The third notice was the most revealing unauthorized energy generation infrastructure. Not solar, not wind, just unauthorized. Because in her mind, if it wasn't on the HOA's map, it didn't exist. She knocked once, just once. I didn't answer. She left a yellow envelope wedged in the gate like a biggie marking territory and marched off with a posture that said victory. 2 weeks later, a notice arrived. The HOA was formally requesting a county inspection for suspected environmental violations. I didn't flinch. The DOE had certified the site clean 3 years prior under a quiet agreement signed in a federal sub-basement in Virginia. The facility was listed in records as residential infrastructure with protected design confidentiality. In layman's terms, nobody without the right badge was even allowed to ask what it was. But Karen didn't need facts. She had brunches. I watched her schmooze the new city council member at something called Green Home Owners of Tomorrow. A month later, my land was quietly rezoned from mixed rural utility to residential renewable conversion. They wanted to turn it into a solar farm, my land, my reactor, my buried heart, all because it didn't fit their fantasy of a clean, green suburban utopia. They didn't ask, they didn't negotiate, they simply assumed compliance would follow pressure. They were wrong. But the beauty of their ignorance, the delicious, incandescent irony, is that they had no idea they were trying to tear down the one thing keeping their lights on. Every smart fridge, every lawn irrigation timer, every backup battery that had quietly hummed through years of blackouts and brownouts, they all drew from the invisible river I built. And one day soon, I would dam that river. Not with rage, not with violence, just with a switch. Because sometimes, power doesn't scream, it hums. So now I ask again, wherever you are watching this, reading this, replaying it in your mind, what would you do if the system that needed you tried to erase you? What would you do if your entire neighborhood declared war on the quiet, humming thing that kept their world alive? Would you fight? Or would you flip the switch and let them find out what darkness really means? Karen never came back with a clipboard. She returned with a bulldozer. It was 8:06 a.m. on a Tuesday when I heard the first low growl of diesel engines rolling across gravel. A sound out of place in a neighborhood obsessed with electric SUVs and robotic lawnmowers. I didn't need to look to know something was wrong. The birds had gone silent. I walked to the edge of my porch, coffee steaming in my hand, and saw them 3 yellow Caterpillar machines parked just outside my front gate like predators lining up to feast. Behind them, a convoy of white SUVs with the Sunny Valley HOA logo plastered across their windshields like a brand of moral superiority. Atop the lead vehicle stood Karen, hard hat tilted awkwardly, clipboard clutched like a sword, phone in hand ready to film whatever confrontation she had rehearsed in her mind. She didn't wave, she didn't pretend. She simply pointed toward the shed, the heart of my operation, disguised and silent, and said to the foreman, loud enough for the entire construction crew to hear. That structure comes down before lunch. They thought this was theirs now. They thought bureaucracy had become bulldozers. They didn't understand what they were standing on. Not metaphorically, literally. I stepped through the gate, calm as always. The foreman, clipboard trembling slightly, gave a nervous smile. "We've got clearance." "Sir." He offered as if I'd mistake him for someone with authority. "HOA said court order approved land prep." "Did they give you a schematic?" I asked. He blinked. "No, just that this was a utility enclosure. You're standing 12 feet above a live cooling chamber," I said slowly, making sure my voice carried to the operators perched inside their humming machines. "The structure you're pointing to contains nuclear-grade shielding, a passive loop containment system, and a buried thermal dispersal intake. It's not a tool shed. It's not a hobby project. It's a microreactor." One of the bulldozers idled. Another operator pulled off his gloves and leaned out of the cab. Like, nuclear, the foreman echoed, his tone cracking. "As in fission," I nodded. "But don't worry," I added, "it's sealed, unless someone cracks the containment lid. Like, say, with a backhoe." That did it. The first engine shut down. The second began reversing slowly, treads chewing through gravel in retreat. Karen stormed toward me then, red-faced beneath her ill-fitting helmet, heels crunching against the rocks like punctuation marks in a tantrum. "This is community land now," she shrieked. "You are trespassing on property scheduled for renewable energy conversion." I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled out a laminated placard, red-stamped, DOE authenticated, with a QR code and federal ordinance reference. "This facility is protected under DOE Statute 4B192, subsection 6, paragraph 11. Unauthorized interference constitutes a federal offense." She snatched the placard, scanned the code with her phone, and froze. The screen redirected her to an authentication portal requiring federal credentials, something she didn't and would never possess. She backed up one step. That one step was everything. The crew saw it. The foreman waved them back, muttering something into his radio. One by one, they turned. The flatbed with turbine crates hissed as hydraulic locks disengaged and trace retightened. Karen's mouth opened like a drowning fish, but no words came. She stared at me, then at the shed, then at the phone that refused to validate her authority. I turned without another word and walked back to the keypad behind the grill cover, fingers hovering for just a second longer than necessary before I punched in the code. The lock disengaged with a hiss. The steel door opened like a whisper of finality. I stepped inside, and I flipped the blue switch marked Grid Isolation. The reactor stayed online. Of course, I wasn't shutting it down, but the feed loop that died instantly. Power stopped flowing outward beyond the boundaries of my property. The grid that once fed every smart thermostat, irrigation controller, surveillance camera, and wine chiller in Sunny Valley went dark. Not immediately, not noticeably, but it began. A slow countdown, a ghost in the system. Karen didn't show up the next day. She descended. Her SUV screeched to a halt at the foot of my gravel road, and she emerged like a legal missile in heels, flanked by two men in matching suits who had clearly never seen actual litigation. One held a briefcase too large for his nervous hands. The other carried a manila envelope like it was radioactive. I was splitting logs beside the shed when they crossed the tree line. Karen didn't greet me. She didn't ask. She simply shoved the envelope into my chest. "Cease and desist," she declared, voice shaking but loud. "Your continued operation of a hazardous energy facility within a residential zone violates community safety statutes." I glanced at the envelope, then tossed it onto the woodpile. "You will vacate the land," she added, "or we will do it for you." I looked at the two men beside her. "Do either of you hold federal energy clearance?" They blinked. "Didn't think so." I said, "Then you're standing on ground you don't understand, trying to shut down a system you have no jurisdiction to question." Karen was trembling now. "You think you can just hide behind a fake permit and your little shack of secrets?" I didn't respond immediately. I just studied her. The way her left eyelid twitched involuntarily. The way her hands clenched like she was holding back an explosion. You are not the governing body of this neighborhood. I said it loud. You're a glorified book club with too many bylaws. And this I gestured around me was never yours to govern. She turned and stormed off without another word. The suits scrambling to follow. That night, flyers appeared on every mailbox in Sunny Valley. Glossy, professionally printed, a green glow digitally added to my shed, casting an eerie sci-fi horror across the cul-de-sac. Danger. It read in all caps, nuclear material near your family, say no to private reactors. Say yes to clean solar. The image wasn't subtle. It was panic wrapped in Helvetica. The next morning, an email newsletter from the HOA declared me a public menace. They claimed I was leaking contaminants into groundwater, that my reactor was potentially terrorist in origin. They used a blurry drone photo taken from above my roof, violating 3 airspace laws, and labeled the structure containment vault. The irony was suffocating. I had protected them for over a decade, quietly, without thanks, without interruption, and now, because I had withdrawn what was never acknowledged but always depended on. I was the villain, so I did what any reasonable man would do. I filed lawsuits, not one, not two, a coordinated legal blitzkrieg backed by DOE counsel and reinforced with declassified operational documents, security audit clearances, and sealed testimony from a man who hadn't used his last name since the Cold War. Trespassing, interference with protected federal infrastructure, defamation of a licensed engineer, attempted annexation under fraudulent zoning. It was surgical. And it wasn't just about winning, it was about establishing that the rules they cherished didn't apply here. Not in my zone, not on my current. They retaliated the only way they could: propaganda. More flyers, emergency meetings, safety surveys conducted with rigged questions and pseudoscientific nonsense. They even launched a fake environmental review conducted by a so-called certified energy assessor named Jack Brindle. A LinkedIn search revealed him as Karen's brother-in-law. The certification he claimed didn't even exist in our state registry, but the damage was done. Fear spread faster than truth. Parents kept kids indoors. A neighbor asked me if his pool water was glowing. Another demanded to know if he could sue me for making his dog anxious. I didn't answer. I just smiled, turned off the porch light, and let the dark speak for me. Because in war, the worst weapon isn't fire, it's absence. And in Sunny Valley, absence had just become visible, tangible, and very, very cold. It started with a flicker, not dramatic, not cinematic, just the kind of subtle, involuntary dimming of light that makes your brain pause before your mouth catches up. Someone's smart fridge blinked off for 3 seconds and reset. A neighbor's Tesla took an extra heartbeat to unlock. Wi-Fi connections dipped, sputtered, then came crawling back with the desperation of a signal clinging to life. It was like watching a city forget how to breathe, but gently, slowly. The symptoms spread outward in waves, subtle at first, then jarring, then undeniable. People noticed, but they didn't understand. Not yet. 30 minutes before the emergency HOA meeting, I walked down the access steps into the belly of my reactor. The air down there was dry, metallic, familiar like the silence you get in a soundproof chamber. Dense and absolute. I moved with purpose, each footstep echoing against reinforced walls that had felt no human presence in weeks. The control panel stood waiting, lit in soft blue. I unscrewed the protective housing, revealing the master load interface. One switch, one decision. Grid on it read. I toggled it down. Grid isolated. No alarms. No dramatic countdowns. Just silence. And then a faint click, like the throat of a kui clearing itself. That's all it took. 10 minutes later, the outer rim of Sunny Valley lost power. It wasn't instant. The battery backups, the municipal overflow systems they tried to compensate. They tried to do what they weren't designed to do, pretend I never existed. But bit by bit, the illusion collapsed. HVAC units groaned to a halt. Smart security lights failed. Wi-Fi routers rebooted and hung in limbo. Streetlights blinked once and died like fireflies in a bottle. Karen had chosen that night to debut her master plan. She had booked the community clubhouse, polished her slideshow, rehearsed her speech in front of a mirror, probably surrounded by post-it notes with words like leadership and green vision. The HOA had passed out flyers, emailed invitations, and even provided snacks. She wanted a show of force. What she got was darkness. The projector died first. Mid-slide, the HOA logo faded into pixelated oblivion and left her blinking under the sudden absence of visual affirmation. The microphone cut out next. Her voice, previously amplified into suburban authority, now sounded small and brittle as she tried to shout over the rising hum of confusion. Phones came alive. Screens lit up with battery-powered despair. Flashlights flickered on. Somewhere in the crowd, a baby started crying. A generator hiccuped once and gave up. People began whispering, then shouting. What happened? Is this part of the presentation? Who messed with the grid? Karen tried to wave her hands, tried to scream for calm, but the room no longer belonged to her. I stepped inside through the side door. No announcement, no grand entrance, just footsteps on linoleum. Deliberate and slow, people turned. A few recognized me, most did not. I walked to the front of the room and took my place behind the now pointless podium. I pulled a small, battery-powered lamp from my jacket and placed it on the surface. Click, soft yellow light spilled across my face, and the room fell into silence. The kind that tightens around the throat like a slow coil. Good evening. I said, my name is James Granger. I own the property on the east edge of this neighborhood. Some of you know me, most of you don't. I waited, let it settle, let them breathe. For the past 11 years, I've been quietly, legally, and voluntarily providing electricity to this community. My facility is not only safe, it's cleaner, more efficient, and more stable than the infrastructure you're currently begging the state to fix. A murmur passed through the crowd. Someone whispered, wait, he cut the power. Another voice, louder, more indignant, you can't do that. I turned toward the speaker and smiled. I already did. Karen stumbled forward through the rows of folding chairs like she was fighting gravity itself. This is extortion, she barked. This is terrorism. I turned toward her, voice calm. This is autonomy. The word fell like a hammer wrapped in silk. You wanted independence from nuclear power. You have it. Enjoy the brownouts. Enjoy the surge fees. Enjoy the 6-month wait for solar panel permits. Enjoy the very freedom you demanded. She reached for her phone, forgot there was no signal, then looked at the crowd like they might save her. But the faces staring back were no longer hers to command. They were sweating. Some were angry. Others were afraid. I didn't stay long, just long enough to say, until further notice, you'll receive no electricity from my facility. You're welcome to rely on the municipal grid, but I wouldn't bet on its capacity. After all, it wasn't built to power this neighborhood. I turned and walked out. Left behind me were flashlights bobbing like ghost lanterns in a panic. Voices overlapping. Someone tripping over a stroller. Karen didn't follow. By sunrise, the HOA inbox was flooded. Complaints, threats, pleas. Karen went radio silent. The only communication was a technical difficulties banner posted on the HOA website in Comic Sans, as if humiliation wasn't already absolute. I spent that morning watching the system from my porch, tablet in hand, reactor humming beside me like a purring dragon. Grid demand was spiking. The city's infrastructure couldn't handle the new load. One transformer popped 2 blocks away. A water pump failed at the community pool. Someone tried to start a gas generator and set off their carbon monoxide alarm. The chaos wasn't explosive. It was procedural, beautifully procedural. That afternoon, I filed the next wave of lawsuit. Coordinated, methodical, brutal, with the full cooperation of the Department of Energy. My legal team submitted signed affidavits, unsealed documents, and forensic evidence of HOA misconduct. The charges range from unauthorized surveillance to fraudulent rezoning to attempted seizure of a protected facility. We submitted emails, memos, drone footage. Then we sent copies to the press. The first news article dropped at 7:42 a.m. the next day. Local headline: HOA tried to replace working nuclear reactor with solar panels. Now has no power. The photo was priceless, Karen. Mid-blink, mouth agape, background filled with darkened houses. The story spread like power loss in a storm. National outlets picked it up. Energy forums buzzed. Reddit exploded. Suddenly, Sunny Valley wasn't a suburb. It was a case study, a cautionary tale. The fallout was swift. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now came bearing offerings. Apologies. USB drives with screenshots of internal HOA chats. One man, Vince, a retired librarian, had been recording HOA meetings for months using his hearing aid as a covert mic. He handed me hours of audio, Karen talking about flipping my land for green grants, discussing demolition schedules, referring to me as the freak in the woods. Vince had never spoken to me before. Now he was the cornerstone of my case. Karen didn't show up at the next board meeting. In fact, the HOA office stayed dark for days. A few board members resigned quietly. Others lawyered up. The community chat was a war zone. People argued over whose fault it was. Some demanded refunds. Some demanded resignations. One particularly angry homeowner threw a lawn flamingo through the HOA window. It stuck there for a week, crooked and defiant, like a pink exclamation mark on a sinking narrative. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. This wasn't justice. This was just chapter 3. Discovery began on a rainy Thursday. The kind of cold, spitting gray rain that felt more like judgment than weather. My lawyers were already 3 steps ahead by then. 2 former federal contractors with security clearances and no time for theatrics. Their names weren't important. Their credentials were: one used to audit reactor sites for Homeland Security. The other once drafted legal frameworks for unacknowledged facilities in Arctic permafrost. Together, they moved through the HOA's crumbling legal shell like termites in a timber wall. Their first action was a motion to compel full digital compliance emails, Slack messages, recorded HOA Zoom calls, group text, not just official statements, but the private threads, the hidden sub-channels where real decisions happened. The judge approved it within 24 hours. He was a former Navy JAG. I'd recognize the ring on his hand from Guam. He didn't flinch at reactor, didn't blink at classified. He knew the smell of buried power, and he wasn't buying Karen's defense of miscommunication. The documents came in slow, defensive bursts like someone peeling back layers of skin and pretending it didn't hurt. But with each cache, the truth crawled into daylight. The inspector, Jack Brindle, who'd signed the environmental hazard report, not only was he unlicensed, he was unemployed. Fired 5 years ago for falsifying data during a land acquisition dispute in another county. Since then, he had styled himself as a freelance eco-consultant with no oversight and less credibility than a teenager's TikTok opinions on ozone. His report, the cornerstone of the HOA's case against me, was riddled with inaccuracies, typos, and citations to departments that didn't exist. One paragraph was lifted directly from a Wikipedia page on Chernobyl, but that was just the beginning. Next came the solar contract, not proposed, not hypothetical, signed, executed, dated 2 months before any official rezoning requests had even been filed against my land. The recipient, a limited liability company registered in Colorado called Sunhaven Collective. On paper, it was innocuous. In practice, it was poison. The registered agent, Karen's cousin, the financial officer, her husband, the company's address, a warehouse with no signage located beside a shuttered vape shop. Federal funding had already been advanced on the promise of community renewable development, using my land as the site of record. Let that sink in. They tried to steal my land, lied about its zoning, fabricated a danger, applied for a multi-million-dollar grant using it, and had already begun spending the money before a single bulldozer showed up at my gate. $43,000 had gone directly to Karen's husband's PR firm for community outreach strategy. 20 more for fake design mock-ups. The renderings were laughable. My reactor shed had been digitally erased and replaced with pastel-painted turbines and smiling white children holding sunflowers. The caption, "Sustainable Hope Starts Here." It was so absurd I didn't know whether to laugh or detonate. I chose something in between. We sent everything to the court. Of course, time-stamped, annotated, highlighted, but we also released a curated version to the press. Within a day, the headline on the local affiliate went viral. Suburban HOA tried to seize nuclear facility for solar scam. It blew up in their faces. The photo was perfect. My reactor, backlit in dawn mist, overlaid with Karen's HOA headshot and a quote bubble that said, "This structure comes down before lunch." By Monday, major outlets picked it up. Energy watchdogs ran op-eds. Reddit threads reached hundreds of thousands of upvotes. Twitter exploded. Someone made a meme with my reactor humming calmly in the middle of a burning HOA office with the caption, "This is fine." Then came the people, one by one. Neighbors who had once called me the weird guy with the fence crossed the street bearing gifts and guilt. A family from 3 doors down brought me an apology note. Their teenage daughter had hand-lettered with glitter pens. One elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, a Marine veteran who I'd once seen yell at a delivery driver for parking on the grass, walked up to my porch with nothing but a thermos of black coffee and the words, "They messed up. Son, I know a war when I see one. You held the line, but the best was Vince, always Vince, the quiet librarian who had recorded Karen's private board meetings with the same diligence he once applied to cataloging microfiche. His tapes were gold, hours of audio. Karen discussing how to force the power guy off his land, how to trigger an emergency response without using the word radiation, how to restructure the HOA charter to give us asset seizure powers under eminent domain language. They even joked about calling in a noise complaint during one of my coolant venting cycles just to escalate things. Vince had recorded it all. His voice never once interrupted, just silence and capture. My lawyers loved him. The court date approached like a slow-motion guillotine. The gallery was full. Reporters, residents, energy officials, even someone from Homeland Security. Sitting quietly in the back, not taking notes but observing like a man counting exits. Karen sat at the defense table beside her husband, both of them pale and sweat-slicked under the fluorescent lights. The judge entered. We stood. Proceedings began. My attorneys were surgical. They didn't dramatize. They demonstrated my license, my federal exemption, the clean audit history, the reactor specifications. Then came the twist. I took the stand. Name, rank, background. I recited my history without embellishment. 20 years in naval engineering, development lead for portable nuclear infrastructure, co-inventor of the SMR-3 compact reactor platform, 4 patents, 2 classified. This facility, I said plainly, contains the third. It's not dangerous. It's not unstable. It's one of the safest, cleanest energy sources currently operating in the Western United States. The prosecutor asked, "Is it overkill for powering a neighborhood?" I smiled. Absolutely. But I like my lights not flickering. The defense tried. They argued procedural confusion, claimed they didn't understand what the reactor was, blamed miscommunication. The judge wasn't amused. You submitted falsified reports. You filed a fraudulent rezoning request. You applied for a federal grant on land you didn't own. This isn't confusion, it's conspiracy. He ruled in our favor. Full damages. Facility protected under federal law. Karen was removed from HOA leadership permanently. The HOA was fined $2, $6 million. An additional $8,000 in damages was awarded directly to me. But the real punishment came after. Within days, half the board members resigned. Lawsuits erupted across the neighborhood. One resident sued the HOA for property devaluation. Another demanded repayment for solar fees that had gone nowhere. The community pool was shut down indefinitely. Someone set fire to the HOA's welcome sign. It melted into a twisted symbol of administrative collapse. Karen. She disappeared, moved out overnight, left a crooked for sale sign in her yard and never looked back. Her house sat empty, overgrown, a monument to HOA hubris. The neighborhood never recovered. Oh, the lawns were still trimmed, the trash still collected. But the soul of it, the smug, curated illusion of order was shattered. The clubhouse stayed dark. Meetings stopped. Memos ceased. Nobody dared enforce anything anymore. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, the reactor humming steadily beneath me like a satisfied animal. I never reconnected their grid. I could have, but I didn't. Because some lessons only stick when the lights go out and the truth comes on. The silence became permanent. Not the kind of silence that follows a power outage, but the deeper kind, the silence of abandonment, of something once smug collapsing in on itself. Sunny Valley turned into a husk. People stayed indoors more. No more HOA newsletters. No more passive-aggressive lawn violation citations. No more Karen. Her house remained untouched after she fled windows, sun-bleached, porch light hanging by one rusted screw, and a lawn overrun with crabgrass and irony. Realtors stopped chewing it after 2 months. Too many questions. Too many stories. The reactor never failed. Not once. While the neighborhood burned through backup batteries and squabbled over portable solar kits. I upgraded. I took my court settlement, plus a rather generous federal infrastructure resilience grant, and did what the HOA could never imagine. I improved the reactor. First came shielding new composite boron-infused panels with triple-layer graphene reinforcement. Then the coolant systems replaced with high-efficiency directional transfer lines used in submarine reactors. I installed an AI-controlled load balancer, capable of adjusting energy output based on real-time demand and weather prediction algorithms. I even added a backup solar array of my own, not because I needed it, but because irony tastes better when plated elegantly. The crowning jewel was registration, Granger Energy Independent Systems, LLC, a one-man company with a fortress grid footprint and zero public shareholders. Just me, just current. Then came the calls, energy startups, grad students, even a discreet inquiry from a think tank operating under a European nonprofit umbrella that had a little too much military phrasing in their email signature. They wanted licensing rights, data partnerships, access to my blueprints. I said no, most of them. Anyway, I wasn't looking to build an empire. I wasn't chasing legacy. I just wanted the power to remain mine, untouched, untethered, but not unused. On the 1-year anniversary of the blackout, I flipped the outbound grid live, but not to the neighborhood. I reconnected only 4 properties. The Thompsons, whose kids used to fish in my pond and once brought me lemon bars after Karen's smear flyers. Vince, the librarian with audio files that dismantled a conspiracy. Mrs. Patel, who was fined $300 for planting tulips an inch too close to the sidewalk, but still stood up during the hearing and said, "This man kept our lights on when the city couldn't." And Jenkins, the ex-Marine who had once glared at me for not waving, but ended up guarding my gate the day the HOA tried to bring in the fake demolition crew. That was my grid now. Invitation only. Everyone else remained on municipal power such as it was. The city's ancient infrastructure couldn't handle the residual load. Brownouts became weekly. Some people ran long extension cords from their cars. Others fought over who got to charge phones at the gas station. One woman tried to power her fridge with a treadmill and a labradoodle. It went exactly as you'd expect. Meanwhile, the HOA, or whatever remnants clung to the acronym, tried to reboot. A few former members regrouped and held meetings at the local frozen yogurt place because they couldn't afford to turn the lights back on in the clubhouse. They tried installing solar panels again. This time, they used a cheaper supplier. The inverter failed within 3 hours, sparked, and triggered the sprinkler system. The roof now smelled like burnt wire and toasted desperation. Nobody came to fix it. Nobody answered their call. The city classified the clubhouse as low-priority, non-essential infrastructure, which is bureaucratic for we're not touching it. I walked past it the next day, just to see the damage. Someone had spray painted over the Sunny Valley sign. It now read Soggy Valley in dripping blue letters. I held a barbecue that evening for the 4 families on my grid. Nothing fancy, just ribs, corn, some folding chairs, and root beer. Vince brought his infamous blueberry pie. The Thompson kids played music off a Bluetooth speaker that didn't buffer or skip a beat. Mrs. Patel handed me a solar lantern wrapped in a bow as a joke. Jenkins grunted approval over the brisket. Before they left, I gave each of them a keychain, small, heavy, engraved, a miniature replica of the control panel's switch. On one side, the date of the blackout. On the other, grid off, grid on. And beneath that, we choose the current. That morning, before the barbecue, I had installed a new sign at my front gate. Black cast iron, laser etched, private power station, no trespassing, HOA free zone. I mounted it with surgical precision beneath the weather mast, where the shadow of the cooling tower passed every morning like a sundial. But that wasn't enough. I wanted permanence. I wanted poetry. So I built a frame beneath the fence line and mounted a neon sign. Took me 3 hours to level it, wire the transformers, and wrote the low voltage buffer. That night, when the last guest left and the fireflies returned, I flipped the switch. Soft orange tubes flickered to life across the gravel path, buzzing, glowing, unmistakable. It read grid by grit, and beneath it, on a small brass plate, polished and secured with heat-treated bolts, the tagline burned steady and warm. Sunny Valley rejected energy. Now it rejects them back. After that, the begging began. Letters at first, slipped under my gate, emailed, even hand-delivered by people who hadn't spoken to me in a decade. We didn't know what Karen was doing. We were misled. Please. My father's on oxygen. I responded to none of them. I didn't need to. They had made their choice. They chased solar slogans and HOA delusions until the current dried up. Now they lit citronella candles like monks during blackout vespers and blamed each other in the community group chat. One man, Brad, former HOA treasurer, brought a bottle of scotch and tried to negotiate. "We can work something out," he said, smiling like a man who thought time healed all wounds and kilowatts. "You're a smart guy. You don't need to hold a grudge." I leaned across the fence and whispered, "You didn't like nuclear, so now you get candles." He tripped on his way out. Over a solar lantern. Poetic. But I wasn't cruel. I wasn't idle either. While they fought over gas canisters and emergency power banks like digital age warlords, I expanded, added a battery wall, upgraded to remote diagnostics, installed 2 micro drones for perimeter monitoring. The reactor was now a fortress, self-correcting, self-sustaining. I even gave a private tour once to a government official who didn't introduce himself but wore a lapel pin I'd seen only once before. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, took notes, and left. 2 weeks later, I received a sealed envelope confirming my permanent exemption under a rarely used clause in the Federal Resilience Act. The wording was dense, but the message was simple. You are untouchable. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evening, coffee in hand, I don't hear leaf blowers or HOA gossip or Karen's voice echoing across the valley. I hear hums, steady, rhythmic, alive. I see lights. My lights on homes that matter. I don't see the rest. They're dark now, not because they were abandoned, but because they abandoned themselves. The reactor pulses beneath me, unseen but constant. The quiet guardian of a truth that once powered a neighborhood and now outlives it. Some people build walls. I built current, and mine never flickers.